Welcome back to the 40% Better podcast. As always, I'm Bill, your host, and Mr. Vogel has graciously accepted our invitation to come and talk about leadership and cybersecurity. And the big question is, how'd you get to become a dopamine dealer?
Well, first of all, Bill, thank you so much for having me on your show. I really, really appreciate it. And you know what? I'll quickly say I post about that regularly on LinkedIn. Even though I'm in cyber, I very rarely talk about cyber. I talk about the things that make me, and I talk about in a lot of my posts where I felt that the way that I could truly have an imprint on the world to actually do something meaningful was to just make people smile, and that for whatever reason I've been provided the gift of just good energy and the ability to make people laugh, smile, and being able to do that, and on a platform like LinkedIn, and which I love, and be able to amplify that and use it as a force multiplier where I can make dozens and dozens of people smile every day through just my vibrancy and comments and what have you. I like to think that that pays itself forward, because people who smile end up making other people smile, and it goes on and on and on. So I like being a dopamine dealer.
I like that. It's good. And it's good for your brain chemistry when you're smiling. So not just dopamine, it's like everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. A smile goes a long way to just making life better.
Very. So my one scripted question that I start with always is not dopamine dealer, but it is, how did you get started in leadership, and was it at a tender age, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Bill. For me, the story of where I'll say leadership kicked in, or the need to be a leader kicked in when I'm going to say it was probably around 10 or 11. And my mom, when I was 6, got diagnosed with cancer. She overcame that. And when I was, like I said, probably around 10 or 11, she got further stricken with levels of mental illness that she's grappled with for the past 35 years or so. And it was at that time where it was, my brother was too little to really be able to help. It was extremely stressful on my dad, and I was blessed with the opportunity to just be able to calmly help her through that as best as I could. And it was at that moment that I realized that I needed to be able to be a leader, and it equipped me with a lot of stuff, equipped me with empathy, equipped me with how to communicate with people when maybe they couldn't quite hear you, and it's the levels of, like I said, of what it equipped me at a young age carried me forward as a human, and I wouldn't wish that mental illness on anyone, but in some regards, I'm grateful that I went through that, because it turned me into me, and I really like who I am, and so it's that's sort of, I'll say, where my journey as a leader started.
Beautiful. I like that you're happy with where you're at. That's huge. And post-traumatic growth is the thing you're talking about, which is, I love that. People don't talk about post-traumatic growth enough. And
Yes.
And you being able to like verbalize that is amazing. It's so fast forward into like the workplace. How
Yeah.
old were you when you started working?
So when I started working, I was fresh out of university. I was 21, almost 22, and I had fast tracked myself. I convinced myself that my path was to being a chief information security officer, so sort of the pinnacle of the cyber field for an organization, being in charge of cybersecurity, and so I worked diligently for that at a very young age, and just really equip myself to be that type of leader. But I got to a pinnacle there within the first 10 years of my corporate career. And when I got there, I was like, wow, the view from here sucks. Why does the air feel so toxic and poisonous? Why did I just, give the better part of my 20s to get into a part that I didn't think, it felt like it was all for naught, and that too provided me with perspective and put me in a different leg of my journey to where I truly started to focus around people as people. I'll admit that during run there where I tried to be in charge of cybersecurity, I was very much focused on relationships for the sake of relationships. I was focused on, like a better term, playing the game in order to get to where I needed to be. And I recognized that it left me at a spot where I felt empty and void. And, it put me in a spot which I remember looking at a bunch of my colleagues before I quit, and I thought, wow, I feel like a corporate gargoyle, right? Where you're physically there, but like you have a heart of stone, And I was like, I don't want that for me. So that too was a leadership lesson for me. Like I said, that, and I think was arguably the most important one that I've gone through over the past, 11 years now as an entrepreneur, was that leadership is around inspiring people, right? It's not about, man, it's not about dictating or yelling or screaming or trying to influence. It's about people, right? It's truly about that, right? And inspiring them and connecting with them in very deep, soulful levels, right? And being able to make change that way.
I like that. Yeah, that connecting with people thing is huge. And props to you for having the self-awareness to recognize that now that you hit your goal, you were like, now what? Okay. Yeah. That's
I think you'll like this story, Bill. Like it wasn't fully, I'll say, my awareness. What really led to it was, and it's a story I love sharing, was that it was actually Batman that saved my life. And so I'm not sure if you remember the Christian Bale / Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, but that
Mhm.
came out during that time. And in particular, there was the night where stuff was starting to click in my mind, and I went to go watch um, the Dark Knight with one of my friends, and it was the one with Harvey Dent, as he was becoming Two Face, and there was a line that was said, "Well, either you die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain." And that line ricocheted in my head. I was like, oh my God, I'm becoming a corporate villain. Right? That's like it. I could not get that out of my head. And the following day, I went to my boss and I said, I'm done. Like I'm out. I quit. And he was like, I don't get it. You saw Batman and you're quitting your job. I like, this isn't making sense. Right? I was like, it's not about Batman, right? That's where the epiphany happened. Right. So I always joke and I say that, Batman saved my life. He put me on a path I would not have put myself on otherwise.
Okay, so I'm making a note that the episode title for this is I saw Batman, quit my job, and it saved my life.
There you go. You can't get better than that, right? I don't even think
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan could write that title.
I am, yeah. Either that or it is I was becoming a corporate gargoyle.
Yeah, either one. There you go. You have creative freedom there, Bill.
Thank you. I, it, I'm always very pleasantly surprised when people, and this is like really, really good self-awareness. So props to you. Can see that and can pull that out. That's awesome. Um, just because I'm very curious, what were some of the indicators other than before you watched Batman? There
Yeah,
must have been some
there
early
were.
warning signs that
Yes, there were.
that Batman was kind of the final straw.
It was a grand awakening. I won't say it was the final straw, but it was a grand awakening. It tied everything together. For me, what it was that it was an extremely toxic environment, very, very toxic, working in an incredibly toxic leader. And I was there was, I was tired when I came home. I was grouchy. I wasn't me, and one of the, again, indicators leading up to it was my wife, saying to me, she said, I don't even recognize who you are. You come home angry and miserable and jaded. She said, like, and it usually takes you usually not till 8 or 9 at night when you sort of are yourself, but you're exhausted at that point, and then when you fall asleep, like you're not you, and that was a wet wet cloth to the face. I was just like, it was a shock to the system, and hearing that from a loved one, and but like I said, the toxicity, and again, it was early stages of burnout. Right, I stopped caring. I no longer cared about work. I could barely drag myself out of bed. I dreaded going to work. I would be at work and I'm like, feel like doing anything. Like this doesn't feel meaningful, or I'm not getting any joy out of this. The signs were all there. Like I said, it was Batman was the grand unifier. He tied it all up in a very nice bow.
I like that. You don't have like a poster of Batman on the wall though, right? But like,
Yeah.
no.
So, like those who have the cat says hang in there. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't have a Batman poster, but I've Batman was my favorite superhero growing up, and and to me, I'm a big believer in leaning into things like pop culture and things that there's levels of messages and signage there that a lot of people miss, and I would talk about the it took me several years to heal from the burnout and from the scars, but I could I always looked at it negatively, right, in terms of my time there. And it wasn't until almost over a decade later, when I was watching Bluey. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bluey. It's a TV show. It's a Australian dog. It's one of the most popular shows in the world, and it is for especially for people who are leaders. It draws so many lessons on how parents learn about leading. And it's a phenomenal show. And again, just showing the dichotomy here from Batman to a children's show like Bluey. It was that show that helped me truly heal. I was watching this episode with my son, and they were tackling in this episode this whole notion. And my son was, I think, 3 or 4 at the time. Was tackling the notion of sort of good luck versus bad luck. And at the time, going through burnout and everything, I always viewed that time as it was bad luck that I worked there. And it wasn't until I watched this episode, almost like I said, a decade later, where it framed it that in life there's no such thing as good luck or bad luck. There's only moments of we'll see. And when they did this in a very comical way that the cartoon dogs were learning these lessons, and I was watching it, and something in me clicked, and all this pressure, whatever, it just came down, this tears streaming down my face, and my son looked at me. He said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "The show is funny." I was like, I'll tell you one day about it. I don't think you'd get it right now. But what it really showed me was that at the time, and like for a decade later, it felt like bad luck, but it wasn't. It set off a series of interconnected events that at the time your brain just can't conceive, right? But it put me on the path, like I mentioned earlier, I would not have gone on. It allowed me to connect and build friendships with people that I would not have met otherwise. You and I would not have crossed paths, Bill. You and I would not be friends now, Bill. Like it was through people and mutual friends like Julie that we met. Like these are all things that would not have happened had I stayed in corporate. And like I said, all those years later, it made me realize that it kicked off a period of we'll see, right? And that's what I think is one of the most beautiful things of leadership, and things that a lot of, I think, leaders aren't well equipped with nowadays, is that like I said, it's very easy. We live in a labeling society. Oh, that was bad luck. That was good luck, or that's his fault or her fault or what have you, right? We never take that pause and say, you know what? We'll see what comes from this, right? We don't know what paths are going to manifest from that. But as a team, we're here. As your leader, I'm here. We're going to get through this together, and this will all evolve in moments of we'll see, right? And it's that type of, like I said, approach that allows for more open-mindedness. It doesn't close your mind, and it allows, like I said, for the manifestations of all sorts of different dimensions to be explored.
I really like that. That we'll see that's a very powerful framing, and also it feels to me like it encapsulates a bedrock of self-confidence,
Yes.
that you're not in the momentary fear of, oh my God, this whatever negative thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, you know, yeah, we are in labeling, and I think a lot of that is also it's very short-term thinking.
Yes. Yes.
This is bad, this is good, but
Yeah.
we don't have the long-term kind of perspective. And the flip side to it is people don't do a lot of um retrospective
Yes.
about life.
Yeah.
um, until they're like on their deathbed kind of
Yeah.
thing, um, and uh, I really like retrospectives. I think, totally outside of the agile software development world
Yeah.
of doing retros, I think in life it's like looking back and going like and sometimes it takes a while, it
Yeah.
took you a decade to
Yeah.
recognize the value of that. Um, that's awesome. Um, how's the entrepreneurial journey been?
It, well, you know what? You don't become an entrepreneur unless you really enjoy roller coasters, which is
Yeah.
ironic because I hate roller coasters. But it's and back to that earlier point, like when I started my career, I had no desire to ever be an entrepreneur. My plan was to stay in corporate, and I couldn't even spell the word entrepreneur. I still barely spell the word, but it like I said, it put me on a path that I would not have put myself on otherwise. And after 11 years as an entrepreneur, I have grown more as a person and as a human in those 11 years than I did in my, I did corporate for about 11 as well. I grew more in my entrepreneurial journey than I did than in corporate. Corporate, I'll say, stunted my growth or grew me in areas that were the ideal fit for a corporate life. And it didn't allow me to truly grow and become a nourishing soul, where I have that level of freedom as an entrepreneur. Being able to grow as a human and explore different dimensions about myself. And the greatest gift that entrepreneurship has given me, apart from being able to spend more time with my wife and kids, is that it's given me the opportunity to pursue the truest version of myself. That was not possible in corporate. I would never have found or got remotely close to a truer version of myself. I'm constantly chasing that version of myself. That's okay because that version is constantly evolving. But I'm more aligned with with who that person is than at any other point in my corporate career. And I know had I stayed in corporate, I would have gone a completely divergent path. And that we've just got that gap would have gotten bigger and bigger. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So I think that's to me has been the greatest thing. But like I said, entrepreneur, the other lesson that I've come to appreciate too is embracing uncertainty. In corporate, I was fixated on eliminating uncertainty, especially in something like cyber, right? You want to focus on reducing uncertainty. Um, the the greatest growth I've had, like I said, professionally, is being able to lean into that uncertainty. Right, that uncertainty has allowed me to uh, focus myself on innovating, whether that means innovating in terms of the work that I do, innovating intellectually, and or in terms of how I approach it, approach business, how I approach relationship building. Last year, as an example, I had this epiphany, and there was an economic slowdown, and for the work that I was doing, and I had this epiphany that I was spending too much time chasing individual clients or individual prospects. I'm a one-person shop, and I thought, you know what, what can I do to leverage this better, right? And to take a different approach here. And by leaning into the uncertainty of, having a consistent pipeline, that type of thing, I recognized I was wasting time, like I said, chasing one-offs. So because I like to think I'm really good at relationship building, I identified four what I call relationship ecosystems. Essentially, businesses or that were sort of at the peripheral of what I do, but they didn't do what I do. But if I focus on developing the right relationship, their clients could become my clients, right? So as an example, I focused on developing relationships with IT managed service providers, with privacy consulting companies, with cyber lawyers. And through that, and doing what I do best, what I enjoy best, the relationship building, I formed rock solid relationships, and now their clients become my clients. So I don't need to sell, right? And it allow me to leverage the one to many. So here I reclaimed tons of hours in my day and in my week and my month and what have you. And I was allowing me to focus on, like I said, on what I did best. That wasn't going to happen unless I leaned into the uncertainty and allowed some level of intellectual innovation to happen.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, that uh, over the years, so many times I've there's been that uncertainty and I've yeah, and I've
Mm.
been like, "Oh, I gotta," you know, um, and most of my most of my career has been at startups or smaller companies. The first 3 companies I worked at were startups. Um, and you're always like, that's an environment where uncertainty is always on the menu, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and, and I think I'm really glad I did that at the beginning of my career because it made I don't know, it got me used to the uncertainty and not,
yes,
to be like, "Okay, in 6 months, we'll look back and we'll have learned something," you know?
yeah, yeah,
The worst case scenario is we learn a super valuable lesson and nobody dies.
yeah, yeah, exactly,
That's
exactly,
you know,
exactly.
and so, yeah, so, just running with that was, kind of I think has been super helpful for me, and you know, I'm always a fan of go work at a startup as early as you possibly can in your career.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
You learn a lot.
yeah, yeah, and I spent a little bit of I've spent time at bigger companies also, and I'm always surprised when I go there at how narrow the knowledge scope is of the people that work there,
Yeah,
especially in the technology side of
yeah,
the business, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, you only know how to do, like, this one thing, and the other stuff you don't even know how to spell this other stuff, much less how to do anything," and I was always like, "Really? Like, how did you get a job?"
yeah.
The which I know is terribly cold of me to say that, but, I when I was hiring, I always expected my people to have broader skill sets
Yes.
because I think they're better problem solvers,
Yeah, 100%,
you know?
100%.
Yeah. When you were corporate and doing cybersecurity stuff, how big were your teams?
So my team at its peak when I left was 5 people, right? So it was myself
Okay.
and 4 others. I grew that team from one, where it was just me, Um, and the funny thing too with that was that the main challenge for me wasn't necessarily leading my team. It was the leadership that was necessary at the executive and board level, where the hardest lessons came. Because it was in an organization where cyber was seen as an afterthought, as a necessary evil,
Mm.
and the obviously people call them soft skills, they'll call them human skills necessary in order to change that type of culture was where again I'm grateful for the lessons I learned there because um, being able to change the perspectives of uh, hardened executives who, in some cases, just only have one view of the world. Being able to change that perspective, you have to draw on a lot of leadership skills to be able to do that, right? So that for me was more of a challenge, more so than leading and growing my team. But yeah, it was leadership takes many manifestations.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I tend to think of it as uh, a it's a multivariable skill stack,
It is. Yeah.
and yeah, and you gotta, you have all these different parts. Communication is one pillar, um, and it's not just that you can speak the language, but that you you get above just the language to the research and the persuasion and um also just being okay with people that don't communicate as effectively and being able to be curious and figure that out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that word curiosity, right? Like, I mean, to me, the best leaders are those that are curious, right? One of the
Yeah.
things that I often see in the demands, obviously broader cyber leadership, is that many of them, because they grew up through the tech ranks, feel the need to be the person with all the answers, right? To be the source of confirmation, right? And to me, the greatest leaders I find are those that are intellectually curious. They're not the ones who say, "Oh, I know the answer. I know the answer." No, it's like, I don't know the answer, but if we consider this, or I want to hear the, so and so's opinion, right? And they're those that draw out the curiosity, right? They're not those that need to be seen as being the ones that have all the answers. And I find, unfortunately, that, like, especially in my world, that I find that a lot of people who get elevated to cyber leadership positions are those that are maybe technical gurus, masters, whatever you want to say, and have all sorts of answers, but lack the level, the depth of intellectual curiosity, right? And that doesn't make them good leaders. Just
Right.
because you have all the answers, great, you're a subject matter expert. But that doesn't mean that makes you a leader. And that's sort of this misalignment we've had in the broader tech/cyberspace for far too long.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, I'm always, I'm always afraid of people that have all the answers.
You and me both.
Yeah. Because their curiosity stops.
Yes.
And and the history of the world has been that yesterday's perfect answer is the punchline for today's joke, you know?
That's true. I like that.
So, back when people said we would never need more than 3 TV stations, you know, or that 56K modems were as fast as anybody would ever need,
Yeah.
or nobody would buy like there's so many experts that have just been so horribly wrong,
Yeah.
um that I always think, even if I think I have the right answer, because I want my people to have ownership, I want them to come up with the right answer. Because if they come up with a right answer that's better than my right answer, A, that's a win.
Yeah.
Um, and B, if they come up with the same thing I'm thinking of,
Mm.
then they own it.
Yeah.
And it's not me like command and control top down. It's bottoms up creativity and problem solving, and people work better when they have that autonomy.
100%. And the other thing too, I love that you're talking about there about the different versions of right. One of the things I always tell, and I'm a big believer in that there are multiple truths, right? Just because I believe something to be true in an outcome or a path, there can be multiple truths, right? Great leaders draw out those multiple truths, right? They don't take their own truths and say this is gospel, right? Do not challenge it. Great leaders draw out multiple truths, right? Because it's through that you end up finding, through those multiple truths, you find a truth that will be as best an optimized path forward for whatever that decision is, right? You need to
Right.
consider all those multiple truths. And
Right.
that's why I think great leaders do that.
Yeah, I talk about situational awareness a lot, and I think that's
Yeah,
the thing, right?
100%.
Is what's the situation, and I've got all these tools, they're all amazing. What's gonna work here and now? Um, and I I think people, sadly, experts kind of get stuck on, oh, it's got to be this particular thing,
Mm.
and they don't necessarily think through, well, what's the context today?
Yeah,
Um, and it's funny. I started thinking a lot about unintended consequences,
yeah,
and um, because unintended consequences, oftentimes in retrospect, you're like, oh my god, that should have been so obvious.
yeah,
Why didn't we?
yeah,
Why didn't we think of it back then?
yeah.
But again, it's you didn't know any better. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
do you ever like? I'm sure in the cyber world you must run into that kind of thing.
Oh, the law of unintended consequences is one of my favorite questions to ask. Especially like I said, especially a lot of technical professionals, security professionals say, okay, well, we need to block this or we need to do this, right? This is the new policy. Say, okay, well, if we do that, what unintended consequences end up happening? And so even just using the example, I was just having this conversation with a client today. They said, "Oh, we're worried about all these email attachments and stuff that we're getting. We just want to block that." And I said, "Okay, well, what are the unintended consequences, right? What units within your business rely on getting attachments, right?" And they're like, "No, we just want to block it." I was like, "Look, I think something bad's going to happen, right? Here's what I think we should do," and they didn't listen to me. And so what ended up happening, there was this organization relied on we got a lot of bids on various projects. And most of these bids usually came in through email and through attachments. And there's a sort of their finance slash whatever it was procurement department. So what they started doing was they started receiving USB sticks via email, and they would just stick those in because they could no longer accept email attachments. Or they were going to the personal email, and there's company data there going, and then they would download from there. Well, guess what? What they thought was reducing risk, right? In fact, the unintended consequence, I'd argue, was that they made more risk, right? Because they
Yeah.
didn't think through what if we do this, what cascades from here? Are there other dominoes that I'm a big believer in Murphy's Law, right? Like what's going to happen if we do this, right? And they just saw it in isolation, saw it in a vacuum, as unfortunately many technologists and cyber professionals do. It didn't think about the overall business processes, right? So to me, especially as a living in cyber, it's not just about the control. It's what does this represent? What processes does this affect? How does this affect the flow of business in different units, right? You need to think, just because we're doing this doesn't mean that it reduces risk. It might reduce risk there, but is it more what I refer to as it's contextual, right? So if it's reduced the risk in
Right.
that area, has it just pushed it somewhere else, or is it actually eliminated or reduce that risk? All it's done is actually transfer it somewhere else. And arguably now the risk is higher because now people are accepting USB sticks in the mail and just sticking that in, right? That's far, far riskier, right? So it's been, like I said, it was a very hard lesson learned for them. But yeah, unintended consequences is one of my favorite laws.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, like just thinking through, like you're getting USB sticks in the mail, irrespective about the security of the USB stick, the time factor.
Oh, it slowed everything down.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you can lose business completely because
100%.
somebody says, I snail mail a USB stick. Are you kidding me? Like, this is not 1994. Like, serious, like what? Um, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Just
lot of stories like that, Bill.
yeah, yeah. No, and it's one of those things. It's just like nobody thought about it. I mean, when I start, okay, early in my career, um, I worked at a company that at that time did a job board, and their prototype that they had built, um, the prototype they built, they had all the resumes in an open directory, um, because they didn't think anybody would reverse engineer the URL of the directory and scrape all the resumes. Um, and it wasn't even a database; it was just an open directory. It's like super early days, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember when I inherited that problem. And I was like, "What? Oh my god!" Um, but and just cybersecurity wasn't a thought back then.
Yeah.
You know, it was security through
Obscurity.
obscurity. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, yeah. I'm secure because nobody knows where I live.
Yeah.
And the reality is, it's easy to figure that out. Um, yeah, it's just and nowadays there's so many different potential vectors
Yes.
for things that when I think about it. I was talking with a CTO a few days ago, and um, they they are running an AI agent that has found a couple of thousand bugs and potential security hazards, and he's like, I got to force rank the whole thing. Security problems come first. I've got a team of engineers, and all they're doing is remediating those problems. And then some of the code stuff, we've actually got an AI agent that can fix it. But people were doing the best they could with what they had available, and they still had all these problems. How do you make that feel safe for your people?
So there's a really good question right there. I mean, it's the I mean, it all depends on the audience too, right? Like again, depending on sector, they have different risk tolerances, right? And what they perceive as being safe means different things, right? Like to them to be like, oh, we don't want to be sued or have the regulators come after us. Okay, so that's how they perceive safety. Others would be like, we don't want to let our customers down, right? That's another right. So safety
Yeah.
means different things to different people. But like I said, for me, I think where it really starts is being able to understand and say, you know what, we we can't secure everything, right? Like we need to have a fundamental understanding of what is most important. And whether it's nonprofit, profit, I would say, what's the life, like, what are the most important business processes, right? What's the processes that make this organization tick, right? And then in understanding that, be able to say, okay, what are the tools, systems, code? What is it that feeds the lifeblood, the DNA of this organization? Let's focus on that, right? Because there's so much supporting cast, technology, what have you. It's like we get stuck in the weeds, like so many organizations do. We end up doing what I refer to as security activity. We're doing these things, but are we actually making it more secure, or are we optimizing risk, right, in the way in which we're catapulting the organization forward? And to me, it's like focusing on those types of conversations. I mean, there's a lot of larger issues at play too that most of my clients aren't able to grapple with because these are larger issues at play. Like, I mean, as an example, as a whole, most organizations are at the mercy of very fragile systems. The fact that one person can click on one link and bring down an entire system, that still sucks that here we are, and I've been in this field for 22 years and we haven't evolved past that, right? That's the majority of organizations still have very fragile systems. And it goes to the incentivization around, again, how we've created code and applications. It was get it out, don't worry about security, we'll bolt that stuff on after, right? We have the better part of, I'm going to say, 2 decades worth of security debt that is now we have to pay down, and that debt getting cold real fast, especially with the advent of all these AI tools and things that are finding vulnerabilities at the speed of light. There's a broader awakening that needs to happen, right? But it's I guess your average organization, they're at the mercy of different tools and things and what have you. So that's why, like I said, it comes down to what can you control versus what you can't control. And like I said, that's why I always focus on what is the lifeblood. Let's focus on that, right? If your vacation planning system goes down for the day, or how you guys are keeping track of your billable hours, what have you, if that's not mission critical, then let's not worry about securing that, right? Let's focus on the stuff that leads to growth for the organization, right? And let's focus on that. So it's around ruthless prioritization, right? And that's where we are in this game right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that ruthless prioritization. That's good. That's a good phraseology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, yeah, it's crazy. Glasswing and, I forget what it's called,
Oh,
uh,
Mythos.
and Mythos, yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting. It's interesting, and it's bringing a lot of good debate and conversations with boards and executives. That's to me is the good in it, right?
Yep.
People are now talking about it, right? Executives that people have been trying for years to have them give a damn about cyber are finally like, oh, maybe we should have conversations about this, right? So it's very, very powerful for having conversations. There's a lot of hype behind it, right?
Mhm.
And I don't want to say necessarily misinformation, but overemphasis on things that would require a lot of things to happen in order for them to manifest. So yes, it's identifying vulnerabilities very, very quickly. For many years we've had tools that identify vulnerabilities very, very, very quickly, right? That in itself is not new. Where the bottleneck has always been, and this is just putting greater emphasis on that bottleneck, is we identifying vulnerabilities isn't hard. How do we, using the terminology I mentioned earlier, how do we ruthlessly prioritize the stuff that needs to get fixed? Because what was glossed over is that just because there is a vulnerability doesn't mean that that vulnerability can be taken advantage of, right? There's what's
Right.
called exploitability and vulnerability, right? So the analogy I always see is like, let's say there's a window open on a 5-story building and it's at the very top, and all the ladders in the world only climb up to 3 ladders or go up to 3 stories. Let's not worry about that 5-story window, right? It's very unlikely someone's going to make their way in. Let's instead focus on the windows that are on the ground level, right, and require very little effort to get into, right? That I think is the important piece. So I think where I'm trying to have conversations is that yes, this is important. Yes, the speed at which vulnerabilities are being identified, that window keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? But that doesn't mean that we need to patch them in that type of period as well. What we need to be able to do is more ruthlessly prioritize what's exploitable, what's going to burn the business down, right? Metaphorically, if that gets exploited, focus on that. We need to get better and quicker at that and be able to communicate that. That to me, like I said, is a great takeaway in this. And the other piece too is that what isn't talked about is we're still creating super insecure code, right? This should be a call out. We need to recognize that we need to do a better job. Forget going to market. Forget all the speed over security. Security needs to be baked in from the get go, right? We don't go to market unless this shit is secure, right? So that to me is the other narrative that is being overlooked right now. It's not, oh, look at what AI is doing. Like I said, it's novel, it's cool, it's not groundbreaking. It's not. But what it is, like I said, it's spurring conversations that have not happened before. And that to me is, I'm hoping we focus on that and not the hype. But the way the world is right now, we seem to focus more so on hype than substance.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's very true. I gotta admit that. That's yeah, yeah.
So I'm not holding my breath, Bill.
Yeah, okay. No, yeah, yeah, yeah. When I started seeing articles about it, I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting," especially because there's only like a dozen companies that have access to it. Um, and yeah, I want my AWS stack to be secure, and I want Amazon to be able to, you know,
Yeah,
continue with their security efforts around that.
yeah,
Um, and and oh, my bank,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that kind of stuff too, you know.
That's
But I
the
kind of
important one.
yeah, that's an important one, right? And I assume that banking starts with security first, just because they've been kind of slow to adopt technologies over the years.
It,
Um,
yeah, it's and banking is an interesting one too, because I mean, it is one of the more regulated spaces.
right, exactly.
Banking was actually the first sector where cyber was a thing, right?
Right,
When I started working in the field, there was basically two sectors. If you wanted to work in cybersecurity, it was either in healthcare or in broader financial services, right? Those were the only sectors, right? Fast forward to today, I'm doing cyber work for porta potty companies, right? Never thought I'd be doing that. But like every company, we live in an age where every company needs to be, they have a reckoning with cyber,
right.
So
Yeah,
by virtue that they've been focusing on it so long, most, I'll say, larger financial institutions are much more mature in terms of how they deal with cyber, just by virtue that they've been dealing with it for, I'm going to say, the better part of 30 years now, right? As opposed
right.
to newer companies or other sectors where cyber wasn't a thing.
Yeah, yeah. This has been cool. Thank you. This has been an
Well,
awesome
that's good.
conversation.
I've enjoyed every minute of this, Bill. I'm glad that
Good.
you're
I'm glad
enjoying it
that,
too.
yeah. No, I'm like, wow. But also I'm like, okay, clock, you know, you've got a day of things. I've got a day of things. And this has been amazing. Any final security words for folks out there?
You know what, I always appreciate that, Bill. For me, the final words is that eh, we live in a digital age, right? We live in an incredible digital age filled with crypto, AI, and all that other stuff. And so, for anyone who's listening, please recognize that cyber is an integral part of any business, from a startup to if you're taking over a manufacturing company, doesn't matter what sector you're in, cyber needs to be integral and treated with the same level of risk. It's not a tech issue. Just like you think about operational risk, environmental risk, personnel risk, financial risk, operational risk, it needs to be in that same breath. Cyber risk needs to be looked at not by the IT guy or the IT team or IT service provider. That needs to be owned at the board and the executive level. Doesn't matter how big or small the company is, it needs to be ingrained in
Mm,
the DNA of the company. So those are my final parting shots.
cool. I love it. Thank you. That was awesome. Um, your contact info will be in the footnotes for anybody that wants to get in touch with you. That was awesome. Thank you.